Alright then. This is episode 20. I'm not savagely. Of course, on to you didn't notice. Yep. If you can see him. Okay. I can assume they were here. Okay. I can assume they were here. But if I can assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep, if I can assume usually. So you have no idea, right? Whoa. Well, I did not spoil into this. I know, right? If you could swim, Julie? Of course. You're not sure? Well, it does, Julie. Until we didn't notice. Right, yeah. So, if you could swim? Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Well, it does for some reasons. But if I could swim. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Well, it does, Julie. Until I didn't notice. Wait, are you sure you realize that, Julie? Until I didn't notice. Yep, if you assume. Yep, no idea. For some reasons. Yep, if you assume. Okay. Because I was gonna make sure. I know, right? If you assume. Yep, if you assume, Julie. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? It does. If you assume. Of course. Until you notice. Nope. If you assume, Julie. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Oh, it does, Julie. Until you notice. Right, are you sure you realize that? Oh, if you assume. Julie. Until you didn't notice. Right, are you sure you realize that? Well, if you could see him. Of course. Until you didn't notice. Nope. If you could assume. Yep. If I could assume, Julie. Until I didn't notice, right? If I could assume, Julie. Until I didn't notice, right? You have no idea. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Well, it was usually. Until I didn't notice. Right. Are you sure you realize that, Julie? Well, I was gonna make sure, Julie. Because you have no idea. For some reasons. Yep. You have no idea. Until I didn't know this. Yep, if you could see him. Of course. Sure you realize that? Well, it does visually. Until I didn't know this. I know, right? If you could see him. Yep. Okay. Until you didn't know this. Nope. If you could see him. Of course. Are you sure you realize that visually? Because you have no idea visually. Until you didn't know this. So if you assume. Until you didn't know this. Yep. If you could see him visually. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Well, hey, if you assume. Yep, for some reasons, and I have no idea. Of course, for some reasons. Yep, if you assume. Of course. Until I didn't know this, okay? If you assume. Yep. Okay. So, how do you know this? Because I said so? Right. Because I was gonna make sure. For some reasons, if you assume. Right. Of course. Until I didn't know this. Yep. If you assume. Of course. Until I didn't know this, right? Well, if you assume. Of course. Did I realize that? Yep, if you assume. Of course. Are you sure you realize that? Well, if I assume, Julie. Of course. Until I didn't know this. Nope, if you assume. Of course. You sure you realize that definitely? Until you know this. Nope, but if you assume. Yep, until you know this. Right. Because I am no sure for some reasons. Of course. For some reasons. Yep, because I was gonna make sure. I know why. If you assume. Yep. Of course. Until you didn't know this. Nope. If you assume. Yep. Of course. Until you didn't know this. Nope. If you assume Julie. Until I didn't know this. Yep. If you assume Julie. Of course. Are you sure you realize that visually? Oh, it does, definitely. If I assume. Of course. Are you sure? I'm sure visually. Until I didn't notice. Right. So, if you assume. Yep. Of course. Until you didn't notice. Yep. Okay. No sure what was that? Well, if you assume. Of course. Until you notice. Nope. Okay.